Hello, my name is Mike Baynham and I work at the University of Leeds. The paper I'm going to talk about today is called Onwards and Upwards, Space, Placement and Liminality in Adult ESOL Classes. It concerns adult ESOL in the UK, settled and recently settled migrants, refugees and asylum seekers and their language learning, and it was published in TESOL Quarterly in September 2010. Adult ESOL programmes have been running for some 40 years or more in the UK, but a big watershed was the adoption of a national curriculum and qualifications framework in 2001, the Skills for Life policy. ESOL became a skill for life, alongside adult literacy, numeracy and more recently ICT. Throughout the 2000s, a research programme funded by government and other sources ran, and a National Research and Development Centre for Adult Literacy and Numeracy coordinated and led this. This resulted in the development of a research agenda for adult ESOL in the UK, something which hadn't happened before. So, the research reported in the TESOL Quarterly paper was funded under the Skills for Life research programme to examine issues of student placement. How, we asked, in hyper-diverse, multilingual city environments, such as London and Leeds Bradford, the site to be examined, did potential students place themselves and get placed in specialist ESOL provision or else in mainstream basic skills courses? That was the practical problem, but we soon saw how it linked to interesting theoretical issues like identity and positioning. How do people position themselves as particular kinds of learners? How are they positioned by the procedures of assessment and assignment to classes? What kind of learner identities result? Positioning theory identifies two dimensions of positioning: how people position themselves and how they are positioned by others. This seemed a good example of the theory in practice. The team for the study was James Simpson, who led the project, Mel Cook, who carried out the research in London, and myself, who worked on the research in Leeds. We identified some sites in Bradford, Leeds and London as cases for our research. The methodology we used was linguistic ethnography, combining the field methods of ethnography, such as participant observation, video and audio recording, and open-ended interviewing with different kinds of linguistic analysis. In the early part of the paper, we described some of the insights we obtained from our fieldwork, our visits to adult ESOL classrooms, and the way that ideas about space and spatial practices came to inform them. We saw, for example, a strong centre-periphery aspect to the location of adult ESOL classes, some of them away from the main buildings in community-based premises, with the move from periphery to centre being associated with mainstreaming, gaining access, moving onwards and upwards, in the words of our title. We identified also a dimension of liminality, in-betweenness. This is a term which comes from the sociologist Victor Turner. Both in the lives of the students whose classes we observed and with whom we talked, whether settled migrants or refugees wanting to achieve citizenship, or else asylum seekers wanting leave to remain status, all of these seem to be in a kind of an in-between liminal position. This liminality, though, was often repeated in the situation of community-based classes themselves, as we explain in detail in the paper. In these environments, however, we saw students and teachers working very purposefully together to make over or appropriate the space for pedagogical purposes. And the notion of appropriation of space is another important idea for us. How do groups of users, learners, teachers appropriate and make over a space, make it their own? Again, we document examples of this in the paper. Finally, and I'd like to spend a little bit more time on this, we saw the National Qualifications Framework itself as an artifact which imposes a structuring regime of progression on both students and teachers, quite literally shaping their subjectivities as teachers and learners in a way that was evidenced in their talk, and that's what I'd like to go into a little bit more detail about. Now, the Qualifications Framework, the National Qualifications Framework for ESOL, as with the other basic skills, moves from pre-entry entry 1, entry 2 and entry 3 through to level 1 and 2, at which point it continues as in an integrated way through levels 3, 4 and 5, mapping onto, for example, the Council of Europe levels in a broad sort of way. As such, it creates what Basil Bernstein has called a vertical discourse or trajectory, which in theory at any rate enables progression and integration with higher qualifications up to and including degree levels. We saw this vertical discourse embodied in the language used by both teachers and students to talk about their learning, moving on, moving up. These were the kinds of phrases and terms that they used. We saw additionally how teachers and students had, as we saw it, internalized the categories of the qualifications framework itself, repeatedly referring to E2, pre-entry learners and classes, or even just to E2s and E2s and E3s, for example. So this is the type of example of data which we found revealing. An ESOL teacher, yeah, I've got entry 2s, entry 3s, level 1s in the same class. Another teacher, she often has entry 2, entry 3 and the odd level 1, all in a group of perhaps 8 students. Another teacher, whether they're pre-entry, we can ask 3 of the pre-entries and we can ask 5 of the entry 1s, and above the entry 3s and entry 2s can have extensions on the exams. So we can see this is the way the entry level, the levels of the qualifications framework has kind of become part of both the thinking and the language that the teachers use to talk about their students. And indeed we find that exactly the same with the students themselves. So students interviewed, I'm entry 2, yeah, and the interviewer, okay. And another student, me, entry 2. So this internalization of these categories is very much evidenced in the language that teachers and students use to talk about the classes. Along with the emphasis on vertical trajectories and progressions, we identified a relative de-emphasis on non-exam related outcomes, such as increased confidence in talking to teachers about their children, or less need to rely on interpreters in healthcare encounters. And I'll give you an example of this. Students in a focus group, especially with English people, I used to feel nervous or something. They speak very fast. Whenever she asked me and I can't do anything, especially doctor, I had to take someone with me, interviewer, just in case. Yeah, I don't understand. Now, actually, I can tell my problem to doctor or to my son's school. Okay? So, these real-life achievements didn't count in comparison to the exam-related achievements of the qualifications framework, themselves proxies for the achievement of government targets, which are the means by which colleges draw down funding. So the achievement of exam targets resulted in the funding being granted or not. This was the significance, if you like. This type of achievement, I think we can understand in terms of Bernstein's horizontal discourse, contextually specific, context-dependent, embedded in ongoing practices, directed towards specific immediate goals, highly relevant to the learner's life context. That's the way that Bernstein talks about the horizontal discourse. And it seemed to me that the non-ratified achievements that we've just been describing fit very well with Bernstein's idea of the horizontal discourse. So, we conclude the paper, and I'll conclude this presentation, by suggesting that there's been a policy-initiated turning away in the interest of measurable achievements of the National Qualifications Framework from the achievement of horizontal discourse, which, though contingent and local, have very profound life impact and effects on the students concerned. Thank you.